That right there is a direct quote from Jeffrey Epstein himself. I mean, talk about a chilling way to try and downplay what you've done. He actually tried to draw a line between being an offender and a predator, comparing it to the difference between a murderer and someone who steals a bagel. It's a really disturbing place to start, but honestly, it perfectly frames the warped self-perception of the man at the center of one of this century's darkest scandals.
So let's get into it. The Epstein Files. This is a story about so much more than just one man. It's about a web of power, of wealth, and influence that managed to shield these horrific crimes for decades. Together, we're going to unpack his mysterious rise to power, his incredibly powerful connections, and the legal battles that, finally, brought some of the truth into the light.
Okay, so you might be asking, why are we talking about all this again right now? Well, the story has come roaring back into the headlines for a very, very specific reason. A massive trove of documents has just been unsealed.
What kicked off this flood of new information? It was something called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This was a bill passed by the U.S. Congress, and it ordered the Justice Department to open up its books and release all of its files from the criminal investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. This forced a whole new level of public exposure on a scandal that a lot of powerful people probably wished would just stay buried forever.
But to really get a handle on this whole scandal, you have to understand the man himself. Who was Jeffrey Epstein, and how in the world did he get so much power and so much wealth? And let me tell you, his journey was, well, it was anything but conventional.
His career path is honestly baffling. Think about this. He starts out as a teacher at this really prestigious private school, the Dalton School, even though he didn't even have a college degree himself. A connection he made there apparently landed him a job at the investment bank Bear Stearns, where he became a partner in just 4 years. 4 years. Then, by 1982, he launched his own super exclusive, super secretive firm. It was this meteoric rise that to this day is still wrapped in a ton of mystery.
And we're not talking about some small-time operation here. His firm was managing assets for clients worth over $1 billion. Now, that's not just wealth. That is the kind of money that buys you access, it buys you influence, and it buys you a whole lot of secrecy.
And listen to this quote from way back in 2003. It's so telling. Long before the major scandals really blew up, people in his inner circle already had this sense that what you saw with Epstein was definitely not what you got. They were calling him a classic iceberg, with all the most dangerous parts hidden deep beneath the surface. And all that money, combined with that mystique, it allowed him to build this absolutely incredible network. His influence wasn't just about finance, it was social, and it stretched all the way to the highest levels of power.
Just look at this list. And really, this is just a sample of the high-profile names in his orbit. We're talking presidents, princes, major celebrities. Now, it's super important to point out, as the sources do, that simply being associated with Epstein doesn't mean these individuals did anything wrong. But what it does show you is the insane level at which he was operating.
And here's a perfect example of the kind of public praise he was getting. This is a quote from Donald Trump in a 2002 magazine profile, and it paints this picture of a really close, fun friendship, years before Epstein's first arrest.
And this just shows how fast the story flipped. Terrific guy suddenly became a creep. This kind of sharp reversal wasn't unique to Trump either. As the allegations against Epstein started piling up over the years, a lot of his former friends and associates began to distance themselves, trying to rewrite the history of their relationship with him.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about the criminal charges and the legal deal that first brought his abuse to light and ended up sparking just immense controversy.
This right here is where the legal dam finally broke. It all started with one family's report to the police in Palm Beach, Florida. After that, there was a search of his home, and what they found opened the door to a much, much larger investigation.
And this quote from the police chief at the time, wow. It's just absolutely devastating. It really hammers home the sheer scale of the accusations. This wasn't one person's word against another. This was dozens of accusers all telling investigators these disturbingly similar stories.
So what happened next is just crucial to this whole story. Despite this mountain of evidence, Epstein somehow managed to get what became known as the deal of the century. First, he completely avoided serious federal charges that could have put him in prison for life. Instead, he pled guilty to lesser state charges and served just 13 months in a county jail. And get this, for most of that time, he was allowed out on work release, leaving jail for his office 12 hours a day, 6 days a week.
It was a deal so ridiculously lenient that many people believe it was designed to protect not just him, but his powerful friends, too.
But the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. A decade later, the law finally caught up with Epstein again, which led to the final chapter of his life, and eventually the trial of his closest confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell.
So here's how it all went down in those final years. In July 2019, Epstein is arrested on new, very serious federal charges. Just over a month later, he's found dead in his prison cell. But the story doesn't die with him. A year after that, his longtime associate Ghislaine Maxwell is arrested, and she is ultimately convicted for her role in the whole trafficking scheme.
Now, when it came to her trial, the arguments on both sides were pretty clear. The prosecution basically said she was a central figure, a predator in her own right who recruited and groomed young girls for Epstein. Her defense, on the other hand, argued she was just a scapegoat, taking the fall for Epstein's crimes now that he was gone.
In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution. Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in prison. For so many of Epstein's victims, it was a measure of justice they had been waiting decades to finally see.
And listen to what she herself said at her sentencing. She expressed regret for ever meeting Epstein and apologized for the pain the victims experienced, even while her defense continued to argue that she was just a scapegoat.
So all of this brings us right back to where we started, doesn't it? Back to the files. I mean, with Epstein dead and Maxwell in prison, you might think the story is pretty much over, but the release of these documents suggests it is far from finished.
And this is really the big debate happening right now. On one hand, you have officials stating that the release process is complete, that it was a comprehensive end. But on the other hand, you have victims' advocates and other critics arguing that key documents are still being held back, which suggests the full, true scope of Epstein's network has yet to be revealed.
So where does that leave us? The unsealed documents have definitely shed more light on this dark saga than we've ever had before, but they also raise this huge possibility that there is still so much more hidden in the shadows. The files are open now, but the question remains: whose stories have yet to be told?